Hi, you're here because you're addressing some aspect of digital sovereignty. Today, we're going to share with you what we've heard from our customers around the world and in different industries that has really informed how we innovate to support our customers in their sovereignty needs. We start by working backwards from our customer needs and requirements, and with digital sovereignty, it's really no different. We've heard from our customers that customers and our organizations around the world are experiencing changing dynamics and complexity as global digital sovereignty requirements are rapidly evolving. Our customers have shared that they need assured proof that their data is protected, privacy is respected, and access to their data is only with those that have the authority. Our customers have also shared that they want to have the knowledge and skills at an affordable cost and to be able to simplify their ability to meet these sovereignty requirements. And then, of course, they want to have confidence that they can meet the requirements of today as well as those requirements that will evolve in the future. I'm Samara Moore, a senior principal at AWS, and I've been here just over 6 years. And I'm sharing with you today, along with Rodolfo Brenes, a principal solution architect who's been here 5 years. And in this session, we'll share a bit with you about the AWS customer-focused approach to digital sovereignty. I'll share a bit about our digital sovereignty pledge, and then we'll go into some of the inherent capabilities and services that enable our customers to meet their sovereignty requirements. And so you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of how sovereignty is addressed with AWS, along with some resources that you can dig deeper later. So if I were to ask each of you how you define digital sovereignty, I likely would get several different definitions. And that's because our customers have different definitions depending on the requirements that they face locally. So it's true that there is no globally accepted definition of digital sovereignty. However, in talking to our customers, our partners, and in regulators, we've identified several key outcomes. Our customers, you want to know where all your data is and control where it's stored and transferred at all times. You want to be sure that neither AWS or a foreign government can access your data. You want to be sure that you can sustain operations despite a technical failure, global instability, or a natural disaster. And you want assurance that you can meet your operational and compliance requirements both today and into the future for your business needs, your regulatory requirements, whether it's for your industry or local regulatory requirements. And so today we're going to talk about, and you'll hear about different capabilities and some services that help enable you to do that. We know there is no sovereignty without foundational security. And our cloud infrastructure is secure by design, and we've been focused on security since the very beginning. Because security is our top priority, we provide assurance to 143 security certifications and standards. Again, foundational security is critical for sovereignty. And so we're engaging with regulators and national authorities around the world so that we can align our offerings with national priorities and that we can support solutions with innovation that drive innovation as well as control. And this is important so that our customers can meet their needs to be compliant as well as their need to innovate. So I'm excited next to go into a little bit more detail about our AWS Digital Sovereignty Pledge. And this is our commitment to providing the most advanced sovereignty features and controls available in the cloud. Now, we've heard from our customers a concern that they may have to choose between a full AWS cloud and a feature-limited sovereign solution. And we believe that customers shouldn't have to make this choice. So we're committing to delivering even more services and features to protect your data and help you leverage the full capability of the cloud while also delivering and demonstrating compliance. So with this, we're expanding on additional capabilities to provide even more fine-grained data residency controls and transparency, building in additional access restrictions that limit all access to customer workloads or customer data, to providing additional encryption features so that you can encrypt everything, everywhere, and providing additional options so you can meet your resilience requirements and be able to survive any type of disruption. So here's just a snapshot from the last 4 to 5 years of continued innovation that helps our customers to meet their sovereignty requirements. And we're continuing to expand our capabilities to give more options for data residency, granular access restriction, encryption, resilience, and survivability. So next, we're going to go deeper into how, by design, we provide capabilities to help you meet your sovereignty requirements. This allows you, again, to address digital sovereignty while leveraging the full power of the cloud without compromising your ability to innovate. I'll share a bit about our global infrastructure and regional design, ways we protect customer data, and highlight services that help to simplify your efforts to manage security and compliance. So you don't have to compromise on resiliency and survivability. AWS currently has 36 global regions that are made up of clusters of data centers with 114 availability zones that are fully isolated to provide exceptionally high redundancy and availability. Each AWS region is made up of multiple availability zones, and these are fully isolated partitions that are designed to operate independently. And each availability zone is made up of one or more data centers, each with redundant network and power. Over 180 of our services are fully regionalized, and that means there's no cross-regional dependency, and they're designed to continue to operate without disruption. Also, we make sure that you are able to meet your resilience requirements and leverage the same AWS services across multiple different AWS infrastructures, like our regional design or edge, like outposts or dedicated local zones, or an independent sovereign region like the European Sovereign Cloud. So I'll take just a minute to talk a little bit more about the European Sovereign Cloud because it really is a good example of us listening to customer requirements and needs and adjusting to align to national priorities. We've heard from our customers that they want to be able to leverage the cloud for their sensitive data and critical workloads, but they also need to be able to demonstrate compliance. And so we've engaged with our customers and listened to our customers, our partners, and to regulators to more deeply really understand those requirements. And we're excited that the European Sovereign Cloud will be available this year in 2025. And this is to give customers additional choice in how they meet their sovereignty requirements. You don't have to compromise on how you protect your data. Our AWS regions are powered by the AWS Nitro system. And this is a first of its kind innovation and the security backbone of AWS. So no one, not even the most privileged AWS admin, can access customer data or customer workloads that are running on Amazon's EC2 instances. And again, to provide assurance of these controls, we provide an independent report from NCC Group on the security design claims of the Nitro system. I encourage you to check out the QR code here to learn more about the many ways that we provide operator access restrictions and controls. Another key capability for data protection is the ability to encrypt everything, everywhere. And so that's why we recommend that you encrypt your data at rest and in transit. Encrypted content is rendered useless without the keys. So you have your ability to encrypt content that's stored in all AWS services, with many services allowing customer or supporting customer managed keys. Also, again, for assurance, both the hardware in AWS Key Management Service and the firmware in AWS Cloud Hardware Security Module are continuously being certified under NIST FIPS 140 Certification Level 3 validation. We are also making sure that customers are able to automate and monitor their sovereignty requirements. So up next, Rodolfo is going to share a bit more about some specific services that you can use to manage your requirements for controls like data residency and resilience.
Thank you, Samara. Okay, so hi everyone. I would like to start going back to the outcomes that we saw at the beginning, right? We talk about digital sovereignty outcomes, and let's take a look at this from a fictitious organization example. We have a fictitious organization named Any Company, and this Any Company is actually looking forward to build on top of all those built-in capabilities that Samara just explained. And at a very high level, we'll look in this digital sovereignty and those four main ones that we saw, right? Data residency, operator access restriction, resiliency and survivability, and independence and transparency. And from those, let's get started. First, we have data residency, and how I like to approach these kind of things is basically doing a mapping exercise. What are the things that I need to achieve, and what might be those services that could actually help me do it? Now, when we talk about data residency, you start talking about data classification, right? Where are you going to put that data if you actually need to store that? But once you define all those things, then you need to make sure that you have the proper governance tools and visibility to actually enforce that. And how you get started with that is what we call in AWS your landing zone. This is basically where you're going to store all your resources, where they're going to live, how do you start deploying those. And we have a service that helps you with that. That's AWS Control Tower. It helps you to have a managed landing zone solution that deploys those accounts, make sure that any new account has a baselining in terms of any guardrail that you want to apply, any data residency controls that you need to specify. So it helps you in that matter. And of course, it takes advantage of AWS organizations. And within that, it gives you the capability for you to leverage organizational units. These organizational units actually allows you to deploy specific workloads based on their requirements or regulations, right? You can have a specific organizational unit for your EMEA workloads, or you can have a different one for your APAC operations. So this is key, as it allows you to deploy based on your business and organizational objectives, and then applying specific controls to those compliance requirements. And the third one is that we start talking about authorization policy within organizations. And these are your things that probably you're very familiar. Service control policies, in this case, you want to make sure that any activity cannot happen on one of your ungoverned regions, right? Maybe you're working only in 3 regions, you don't need all the other ones. So you can leverage these service control policies just to block any activity within those regions or actually avoid any data sharing across specific resources. And of course, we recently launched resource control policies. This is a capability for you to enforce data perimeter protections within specific resources. Like, for example, if you want to avoid any unwanted access from a different identity outside your org to an S3 bucket, you can also do that. And finally, we have management policies like declarative policies that allows you to have specific examples around specific attributes. So beyond going only on identity and resource access, you can actually do configuration evaluation and enforce that centrally. So it allows you to keep control very tightly in your data, and how do you actually make sure that that is staying on where it's supposed to stay. And then finally, you can use tag policies, for example, to do any kind of tagging and follow-up on your data classification, for example. And it gives you a very nice way to have an inventory and run compliance evaluations on top of it. Next, we have operator access restriction. And here is where we start, of course, talking IAM. The first one is IAM Identity Center. In this particular case, we can see this as a capability for you centrally manage your workforce identity access. So It is a central way for you to manage your permissions. You can actually federate access to an external identity provider, so you can centrally manage the permission sets that every user should have access to. And not just that, but also which accounts within which OUs are actually going to work. Then we have system managers. We can see this as our secure gateway for operational tasks. If we have people going into specific resources for troubleshooting, System Manager, using its capability of Session Manager, allows you to actually audit and control user access to those particular resources and make sure that you're having visibility on everything that is happening and actually being able just to connect without actually generating an outbound connection to SSH or RDP, right? This is using an inbound connection. So you basically generate outbound connection. So you close that open ports. And then you have things like Access Analyzer. IAM Access Analyzer allows you to actually enforce least privilege control, taking a look on over-permissive policies, for example, and actually unwanted external access that might be running without you actually knowing. And of course, all these tied together with IAM Identity and Access Management, it allows you to actually have fine-grained controls over user policies. Just to tie those together, if you need to make sure that you have specific guardrails on and boundaries of what users can and cannot do within your environment. Third one, we talk about resiliency and survivability, and we saw how all the regions are spread across all our environments. We talk about that, availability zones, we know about that. But from a data perspective, for example, AWS Backup is our centralized capability for you to manage centrally and schedule your backup tasks, and make sure that you are enforcing those backups and that you have specifying a retention policy for those. It gives you an isolated form to store those backups in specific vaults. It protects you against things like ransomware, right? In case if you are affected of those kind of events, AWS Backup is a managed service that allows you to specify those kind of things. Then we talk about Resiliency Hub. Resiliency Hub is basically a service that allows you to identify single points of failure within your applications, keep specific metrics related to your disaster recovery plans, and also gives you suggestions on ways for you to improve based on your RTO and RPO objectives that you define within the service. But of course, you make all that planning, but you need to test those plannings, right? And that's when things like fault injection service comes into the picture. This service basically allows you to do some chaos engineering in a safe way. You can run your experiments, you can do some testing on your plans, and it will also give you recommendations on what are the things you need to improve, right? And you can keep this on an ongoing basis. It's not something that you do once and you forget about it. So this service actually allows you to do that. And of course, we all know Amazon CloudWatch. This is your the service that will allow you to have a strategy around logging for activity. It will allow you to correlate metrics across different services and regions. And do that investigation, you can set up alarms. And we also recently launched an integration with QDeveloper that allows you to run Gen AI-based investigations where you can interact with the service, do some hypotheses on what is going on, and you can quickly identify a problem feeding from all that data that the service actually already have. And then, of course, we have independence and transparency. All those things is great. You're applying those, but you need to make sure that there's a way for you to actually provide evidence that you're doing all that stuff. And the first one, of course, we have AWS Artifact. This is our compliance hub, when you can actually self-service on agreements, things like HIPAA, VAA. You can use self-service through Artifact to do that. You can generate reports on AWS certifications and attestations. It is a central way for you to self-service and actually independently revise or review all the security controls of AWS. But that's not all. Of course, we also need a way for you to do that on your data living in the cloud, right? So that's when things like Audit Manager comes into place. This is a service that allows you to map your resources to specific compliance frameworks, industry standards. You can create your own, evaluate that, and automatically will continuously gathering all the evidence on top of it, and it will give you the chance for you to aggregate that. And of course, we have CloudTrail. It will be measuring all your API activity. It will give you a immutable way for you to centralize your logs and see that activity and provide evaluations on that and assurance on all those user activities. And finally, we have AWS Config to complete the picture. In this particular case, besides the API activity of all your identities, it will give you a historical timeline of the changes on your resources, resource inventory capabilities, and of course, you can run also evaluations on top of those resources. If something changed, if something has been move from compliant to non-compliant, you can actually see that and take actions on it. So it completes the picture in terms of those outcomes. But let's take a look on, besides doing the mapping, how at a very high level this is going to look and how we see customers actually addressing this. First of all, as I mentioned, when we talk about the beginning about data residency, we're talking about a proper foundation. Customers, they spin up a new account. They say, okay, I'm going to create a new organization based on this account. Now this account is the management account. So I will start setting some recommended organizational units, right? That way we can store our workloads on specific regions, and I can establish, depending on my objectives, what are the guardrails that are going to set on those. And of course, we have recommended organizational units for you to deploy. For the ones that are familiar with those, we always recommend for you to have a security organizational unit when you are deploying your security services, your infrastructure organizational unit for your shared services, and you have like independent workloads that you may deploy. Right? You can have one organizational unit for your workloads, as I mentioned, in a specific region, and you can deploy as needed. And also, you can nest it and take advantage of the hierarchy structure of these organizational concepts and start building your environment, your landing zone. And of course, one that you always recommend is a sandbox, where your developers can actually deploy workloads and test in a safe environment. Now, we mentioned that one of the things that normally we tend to do when we talk about data residency is specifying region controls, right? And the way to do this with native capabilities within organizations is that you can apply region-based service control policies to do that, right? You can say, okay, any action on this particular region is totally blocked, or maybe I cannot deploy specific types of resources because it will affect or put in risk my digital sovereignty outcomes. And this way, it allows you to enforce your data controls using service control policies. And of course, we're going to look how this evolves on data residency discussions. The thing is that based on those region access controls, you're basically establishing a perimeter based on your organization. But what happens if somebody else is coming outside your organization? You want to also make sure that you can restrict that. Normally, how it has been done is through resource control policies from the organizational level. Before that, you had to have resource policies on every single resource, so that was painful to handle. So now with RCPs, it allows you to have a centralized way for you to do this. You can leverage tag policies, as I mentioned, to have classification of your data and have proper tagging on not just the data, but on the resources holding that data. And you can take advantage of declarative policies that has a capability for you to centrally handle attributes on EC2. Let's say that you have also snapshots of your workloads, EBS snapshots, so you want to make sure that all of those are staying private, regardless of any user, if they have an action on the member account, they cannot go ahead and modify that because those are being established from your common controls at your organizational level. So this is very powerful, and this is how you can actually block access from those to those resources. And of course, as I mentioned, organizational unit for sandbox accounts. You can use Identity Center to establish your access controls and make sure that specific users only have access to specific environments on specific accounts that lives on this particular sandbox OU that is isolated probably from your production workloads. And this is where you actually start looking into this and how you can define specific, let's say, access to only specific workloads. And this works for every single scenario. Of course, there might be resources that you need to share, and we recommend to use Resource Access Manager to share those resources across your OUs or your accounts. And as I mentioned, this supports outcomes that we're already seeing, restriction of your operation access, and also how you actually provide resiliency and survivability capabilities while isolating these kind of workloads. You want to make sure that everything is being logged on audit. There is a capability within CloudTrail that allows you to have an organization in CloudTrail where you can create a searchable log for all your API calls. You can create those centrally. You can establish an S3 bucket where you're going to put all those. And you want to make sure that you also have inventory tracking for your resources with AWS Config. That way you can track compliance and track changes within those resources. And of course, you want to set SCPs to protect those environments, right? That way nobody can tamper those, and you are not going to lose proper visibility on those kind of changes. Supporting, as I mentioned, transparency and independence, and also survivability and resiliency. Now, of course, if you're storing customer data, you want to make sure that you are protecting those, only storing those when it's needed, making sure that there is a limited access to those those data storage. And you can use things like SCPs to do that, to prevent any changes on the bucket visibility as well. And then you can use AWS Backup, as we saw, to establish your activities of backup. You establish your life cycles and making sure that those are protected. And of course, you can also leverage IAM Access Analyzer to review any data that has an unwanted external access. So you can have actually some visibility and monitoring as that happens. So you can leverage that as well, supporting every outcome that we see here. Finally, you want to make sure that you have observability and monitoring accordingly. If you use something like Amazon CloudWatch, it will give you that capabilities, as I mentioned. It also supports investigations in real time with certain capabilities for you to troubleshoot as something happens. You can deploy it with System Manager, that is basically, as I mentioned, our operations hub, the capability for you to log into your EC2 instance without having any open ports. And take advantage of native AWS organization capabilities like delegated administrator, right? This is something that, for example, if you have a service, let's say AWS Config, only your security team should be able to see those compliance status and those reports. So you want to delegate the administration of that service to that security team, to that security account. That way they don't have to be logging into the management account. So you also prevent from those anti-patterns from happening, supporting all the outcomes. Now, how can you make digital sovereignty much easier? How you can do this in an easier way? Because we just saw all these capabilities, and of course those are fine, but how you can actually improve this? So we have a managed service that is your solution for your foundation, to establish that foundation, and that is AWS Control Tower. As we talked at the beginning, we talked about the landing zone, how a customer could start with this, how they can start deploying all the different OUs. So the Control Tower service will help you with that. It will centralize that identity. It integrates with Identity Center or other external identities that you can integrate with the service, giving you that single sign-on capabilities and to manage your permissions centrally. And on top of that, allows you to have centralized logging of CloudTrail and AWS Config as well, and protecting those resources in a managed way. It automates compliant account provisioning, meaning that you can spin up new accounts from this service, making sure there is a baseline. And if that account goes out of the baseline, it will let you know that the specific resources might be non-compliant, and you can take actions on those. And besides all those mandatory and best practices that the service already has built in, you can establish new controls from a controls catalog that I'm going to cover in a few minutes. You continuously evolve in this landing zone. By default, you can take advantage of native capabilities, and also you can customize the solutions based on your very specific requirements, right? We have customization solutions like customization for Control Tower. We have integration with solutions on Terraform, like Account Factory for Terraform, or you can even take approaches that are more custom to a specific highly regulated industries like landing zone accelerator. So I encourage you, all of you, to take a look on those. If you have specific cases that you may think that Control Tower will not cover, there's a way for you to customize on top of it as well. As we saw the initial landing zone that we were trying to deploy with the scenario of any company to achieve these outcomes. Control Tower gives you this setup. As you can see, it has a management account. It creates an organizational unit where you can have a security account and a login account. And it also gives you the capability to create new OUs. In this particular example, a sandbox OU. It integrates with Identity Center for user access, and then you can achieve your digital sovereignty outcomes for identity. And then also data protection accounts. There is a new integration with AWS Backup as a service. So you can basically tell Control Tower, these are going to be my administrator accounts. This is going to be my backup account where I'm going to store all my backups. And you can actually centralize that deployment and then delegate that access to a specific team. As for today, actually, we need to change this. It's not currently anymore 3 frameworks. We actually have 10 available frameworks within Control Tower since last Friday. We have over 760 controls across 75 services and different control objectives that basically aligns to what we were talking, right? Besides that landing zone, what are the things that we can make easier for you to achieve those outcomes in terms of all the things that we just discussed? Control Tower, within those capabilities, it deploys 3 types of controls. It deploys detective controls that are basically those safeguards. I talk a lot about SCPs, RCPs, declarative policies. Those are all preventative controls. But basically what you're doing there is you're basically establishing a guardrail for things not to happen, right? But what is, maybe you don't want to enforce that, you just want to make sure that you're keeping a close eye on those things. That's when you can actually take advantage of AWS Config integration with Control Tower to deploy those detective mechanisms. And making sure that maybe there is a versioning enabled on all my S3 buckets, if I can do that with that. And of course, we have proactive controls. You want to shift compliance to the left. You want to do some evaluation before the resources actually get deployed. You can use CloudFormation hooks and integration with Control Tower to actually deploy those policy evaluations and make sure that something is not happening even before it gets deployed. So let me move into a quick demo of Control Tower. See. That's okay. Yeah, it's not working. Let me just do this. All right. Here we have our identity center. This is basically what Control Tower will deploy for you. In this particular case, I'm logging into my management account with proper permissions. This is a user that has the proper permissions for the sake of this demo. I will go into the service of Control Tower in this particular case, and what we're looking here is the main dashboard for the service. Here is going to be your managed landing zone. For the ones that are not familiar, you will see here all the main settings. The main explication is going to let you know how many organizational units you have, how many accounts, how many controls, if you have any non-compliant resources, and the description of the rules associated to those. And then you have a pretty good summary of all the accounts that are enrolled, right? If I go to the organization, you're going to be seeing that pretty similar setup with some compliance status evaluations attached to that, similar to what you will see in your organization dashboard, but this from a central point of view. And if you go to your landing zone settings, remember that I spoke a lot about region denied controls. In this particular case, I have a landing zone that is being managed by Control Tower that is basically only working on specific regions. And I'm basically denying anything else that is not part of those regions. In this particular case, I have 4 regions. And I have not governed regions, but block or denied regions in all the other ones. So this gives me a centralized way to do that. If I go to the specific control that I deploy, it will let me know all the details of that. It's going to let me know how is that attached, if it is aligned to any framework. And this particular setting, I'm doing from the landing zone settings, right? This is by default there. And I'm going to go into a closer look on how that will be customized for specific organizational units in just a minute. But let's move into the controls catalog. Remember that we just saw, this is the overall controls. We have 760 controls. We have multiple types. We have implementation. We have behaviors, different types that we can see in this one. And if you go to the categories, you will see that we have different common controls. Let's see if we're talking about encryption or data protection. If you want to see which controls are there, how those are mapped to specific frameworks, all that metadata is embedded in the service. So you can take a look on where those categories are. We have different, let's say, services. We have, in this particular case, in this region, 74 services covered by Control Tower. And you can actually start looking at the controls that could apply to those. We have, in this particular case, 10 frameworks. And these are from the commons that we have, CIS, NIST, 800, to new ones that we just applied. And we have a digital sovereignty group. In this particular case, you can see all the controls that are associated to digital sovereignty controls that I may need to deploy. If I want to take a look on maybe a specific common objective, I would like to take a look on what I can do in terms of encryption. If I want to do, let's say, a specific service, I want to say, okay, what is regarding data protection on S3 buckets? And it will give you a couple of controls based on that catalog, right? And I can start deploying those. It doesn't mean that those are the only ones that you can do, but in this particular case, it will give me all the mapping, all that metadata. It's going to ask me, it's going to show me if it is enabled on a specific OU, if it is part of any particular deployment already, and it's going to give me a description. This one in particular actually integrates with Security Hub. If we move back to the controls, I'm going to say, okay, show me, again, any particular control that might be associated to this data encryption that I'm trying to handle for S3s, and then I'm on the detective behavior, right? These are AWS Config rules. So I can do the filtering, I can get into the actual type of control. And once I have that, I can centrally deploy that. And we can look at the details. In this particular case, I have two. If I go to the encryption at rest or enforce that I have a policy that requires that, I can go ahead and centrally enable this. And then I can choose where I'm going to deploy that. In this particular case, I'm doing it on the sandbox and the workload 1 OU. I'm going to select to deploy that, and it basically is going to centrally deploy a config rule that is going to run that evaluation on my behalf. And I can centrally do that pretty easily. And then I can take a look on the recent operations. If that failed for whatever reason, it will let me know. If it was successful, it will also let me know. Another one that I wanted to share with you are the region denies. Remember that I mentioned that I have a landing zone, a region deny setting? In this particular case, I also want to do that, but only for a particular OU. You saw that I have 4 governed regions, but what happens if I, for one more strict controls on one particular one, I need to only allow one region. So I can go ahead and say, okay, let's run this control only in this particular OU. I can just go ahead and say, okay, in this particular case, US East 1 is the only region available. Everything else, besides the general setting that I have for my landing zone, this is the only one that is going to be available. So I basically say, okay, let's do this. I'm making sure that this is what I want. I click next. This is the example of the service control policy that is going to be managed. I can add exceptions for specific services besides the ones that are already there that are global services. And I can just add that as a parameter into the exception of this SCP as an exclusion. Also, I can do that same thing with principles. I can say this particular principle is not going to be affected by this one. And then I have a summary of it. I can just deploy it. And in that way, I can have a more strict control on a specific workloads that I care, right? Now, if we go into enable controls, this one is also something that got launched a couple of weeks back, is the way for you to centrally see what types of controls I have and where are those deployed, right? Before this, you needed to go to a specific accounts and see which controls were there. Now you can centrally have a visibility on all of that, and you can actually make sure that those are the ones that you care. In this particular case, all those 2 controls that we were trying to deploy in those accounts are already deployed, and we're good to go with that part. And if we go to the details, again, it will let you know which are the mappings on that one. It's going to let you know where are those applied, and so on. All right? Cool. Now, traditional audit and evidence collection challenges. We saw how this gives you the capability for you to centrally deploy controls, right? How you can establish your landing zone, taking advantage of these things. But the last part is how do you independently provide transparency on all those processes, right? And how do you actually run audits on it? And problems or challenges that we see customers face is basically, right now, auditing efforts take a lot of time. So it is basically you do a specific in-time evaluation. You take a snapshot of how your environment looks like. You gather all that evidence. You do screenshots. You put all that together. And you rely on sampling, right? That's something that maybe you cannot scale really easily. Sometimes when you complete a report, basically time passed by already, and certain things that you looked are changed. There is a dynamically evaluation that you need to always be running. And when you address a risk, time passed by, so it will affect your auditing process anyway. So this is when we talk about Audit Manager. Audit Manager is a way for you to automatically collect and generate evidence across your AWS organization. By default, what it does is that it leverages different sources. One are compliance checks. This is using services like AWS Config evaluations and rules. It takes also advantage of security hub security frameworks evaluations as well. And then allows you to provide external evidence, right? Could be policies, procedures, emails that maybe not be living on AWS. So you can externally provide those into the service. You can view activity from CloudTrail. It will generate some responses on that one. It will add it to a specific controls. You don't have to do that mapping. It's already being done on your behalf. And you can have service-to-service API calls to check specific configurations as well. And at pretty high level, this is the same environment that I showed you before. This is also running on Control Tower. In this particular example, what I'm going to do is basically, instead of logging into the management account, I'm going to log into audit account that lives under my security OU, because that's the delegated admin account for my audit manager service. If I go into audit manager, here from the console, once you log in into this particular account for auditing, for security, you will see that you have a menu within the dashboard. You have multiple things that you can do in here. And in this particular case, I have 3 custom frameworks running for presentation only. And if I want to go into the actual controls library, this is basically not controls, you're enforcing any control, but this is evaluating those recommended controls from a specific framework. I can take a look at as you saw in common controls on Control Tower. This is a similar experience. You can see, okay, I was focusing on data encryption. I can take a look on which controls I have in here available. I can see what are those controls, how those are mapped, and how are those being fed into the service, right? What is the service that is actually ingesting those data within the service? In this particular example, if I'm doing asset tracking, which are the controls that are related to asset tracking, and where are those mapped? In this particular case, are mapped to Security Hub RDS related best practices. If I go ahead into the library, you will see that we have standard controls, as I mentioned, and then we have also custom frameworks. This is a custom control, that I created for the sake of this presentation that is basically just looking into encryption on certain services, Dynamo, S3, EDS, and what is actually leveraging is basically a config rule, like the one that we saw being deployed in Control Tower. So this one, I take those, I go into the assessments, I go into the sample library. We have 32 libraries right now. We have a recommended set of best practices and frameworks that are known into the industry. For this one in particular, I'm taking the Australian cybersecurity assessment. If I go ahead and take a look on those, you're going to see that there are multiple guidelines, right? If this is something you're following, well, they have several guidelines for different things, but maybe you don't need to run all of those, or maybe you need more, right? It depends. In this particular case, I'm looking at monitoring, just guidelines or recommended guidelines for monitoring, and I can say, okay, I have all these controls, but I need to customize this. I can make a copy of this, and I can make changes based on that. And then I can create, and it's basically going to look like this. This is going to be a custom framework that I created. Once you're in there, basically you can take a look how many controls are there, and I can run an assessment based on that. And you can see it has 2 control sets, the one that you just saw that I created, and then we have a reduced version of all the guidelines for monitoring, the ones that I care for this environment. I can customize that, and I can basically run an assessment on it. In this particular case, I have 3 assessments already running. I can create new ones based on those sample frameworks or any custom that I have. And this one, I'm logging into the custom framework that I just had. I have those controls. I can see the evidence that is being gathered. I can see if those are under review or not. And once I have that, I can take a look on actually making the selection of what I need, right? By default, it will start gathering a lot of things on your behalf. And in this particular case, is looking at the login policy, right? Those I need to provide. This is basically a sample. I just say, yeah, this is my login policy. I'm going to upload it into the system. I'm going to attach it to the assessment and then to the final report, because I want this to appear in the final report. So I just select it and I say, okay, add this to the final report. I confirm, and that was going to get added to the evaluation. Once that happens, I can just go ahead and do that. Now, if I go back in this particular case, I can see all the controls. I have the summary. I can mark those as review. And once I know that everything is review and how I need it, you can delegate those reviews as well. You can make sure that you add those into the actual reports. And now, one way to do that is on how I show you, but you can also run leverage Evidence Finder. Evidence Finder is basically a service that is powered by CloudTrail Lake technology. So in this particular case, I'm taking an assessment, I'm doing a sample of all the compliant resources, and I'm grouping those based on the control. So show me all the controls. I'm basically doing an analysis. I'm gathering all that evidence, taking advantage of this service. And in this particular case, I just want to take a look on the evidence of the control that I just created. And I want to add that to the particular, let's say, report. So I can say this is compliant based on the rule that I just have in here. It's going to tell me how I'm getting that one. I can see the details of that rule, what it's doing. And actually, if I go deep into the actual piece of evidence, you're going to see that it has, besides that, it's going to give me the RNs of the resources that are running. It's going to explain me that it's basically taking advantage of an S3 evaluation rule within config, and it's going to tell me that it's compliant. based on that config evaluation. And I can just go ahead and add this evidence to the final report. Once I have that report, I can just go ahead and generate, when I have that assessment with all the evidence, I can generate a report. And basically, when you see the evidence selection, these are basically explaining what I just showed you. And from here, I can just decide and say, okay, once I'm sure that everything was how it's supposed to be done, I can generate a new report. And once I generate the new report, I basically name that, and that report is going to live on an S3 bucket. I can generate every single time I need a new report based on that continuous evaluation and that continuous compliance feature of the service. I can keep continuing. If I get an audit like next month, 2 months from now, next year, I can continuously be running and just generate a new report based on that. Once I generate the report, you have these historical changes of each one of those. You can select those. You can download those. And it's going to give you a folder of that report. And you can actually run integrity checks just to make sure that the evidence was not tampered, right? And you can do that through an API call. When you go in here, this is the folder structure. You're going to see in here that you have all the you have a summary of the report. You have your folders for the evidence that I just added into the report. It's going to give me a README file that actually explains how this is, how you can run integrity checks as well. And you can also, you have a digest, that is how you do it. In this particular case, I just take a look at the PDF that it was generated. This is a summary, of course, of the final review. It's going to explain me the accounts that were under scope of the analysis. It's going to show me the controls that I'm running, the owners of that. Is going to have a table of contents of what I added. In this particular case, I just added a couple. And then it's going to explain me how I'm gathering those. If you want to take a closer look, you can actually move from here into the actual evidence. And this is just, as I mentioned, the summary. If you want to look at the evidence, you can do that from the PDF, or you can just go into the folder and expand that. As you can see, this is the evidence. I uploaded a doc file for my login policy. And also, as you saw, also added the evidence for the S3 rule that it was running for me to check the encryption, right? So I can also go ahead, open that one. It will give you the summary of that evaluation, when that happened, all the evidence that I need to provide that to any other. It could be internal teams, could be external ones. And you can customize that as needed. Hopefully, this was useful for you, give you a sense on what are the things that you need to do from the start, how you establish your foundation, and how do you move and keep evolving that one until you can actually provide assurance on everything that you're building. Now, let me just transition back to Samara, that she will guide you through a real customer example real quick and wrap this up. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so I'm excited to share with you about a customer example with Vellev. Vellev, who's one of Denmark's largest pension companies, had to migrate all of its existing IT for data protection and compliance requirements. They completed their migration in only a year, and that helped them support their regulated operations and get the data, localization, transparency, and compliance certifications that they needed. We heard about several services just now from Rodolfo, and they leveraged several of those services to accomplish this, like AWS organizations and control tower, and they leveraged AWS Config rules along with Security Hub for detective controls. And this was key for Vellev to demonstrate compliance with the Danish Finance Authority's regulations around data handling. They were able to demonstrate data residency and resiliency, and they are further innovating now and driving efficiencies using the cloud. So we're excited to share a real example here. And now for some key takeaways. You should know that you can adopt cloud and meet your local framework requirements. You can protect your data, respect your privacy, and architect for resiliency. And we're committed to continuing to innovate and provide more services and capabilities to meet your changing needs. So first, take advantage of these capabilities. They're here. And as you are moving forward, and you build, leverage the best practices that are available. We'll continue to add more. We'll continue to respond to what we hear from our customers, as well as take advantage of the native capabilities. And then reach out to your account manager to learn more about how you can leverage these services and capabilities for your environment. Also, to learn more, here's some resources, and please feel free to leverage these QR codes to learn more about our digital sovereignty offerings and the offerings of our partners at AWS, and also some of our online resources where we go deeper in some of the things we talked about here today and more. And you can look at white papers and blogs and even some of our security service documentation that goes into more details. I ask that you complete your survey and provide feedback on this session, please. And then for learning even more about some of the things we talked about, here's just a few related sessions that you can attend either tomorrow or you can view them online. Also, please learn more by stopping by our governance, risk, and compliance kiosk and talk to some of our professionals there. So again, thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.